Hey everyone, I'm going to be doing the movie review for the Odyssey, and I'm excited to talk about this one. Something I did differently than in past movies. One, I held myself without seeing the trailers, so each of the scenes were truly brand new to me. And secondly, I'm not coming here prepared knowing what to say. I just got out of the theater and I'm going to kind of dump all of my thoughts into this. So, this is a Christopher Nolan movie and it has kind of those same Christopher Nolan themes that you see in other movies. So, the story isn't linear. You're going to have this switch to the future, switch to the past, show the present, show flashbacks. And in movies like Oppenheimer, there were times when it was a little bit confusing because you couldn't tell what point was what. You're still trying to figure out what timeline is which. In this movie, it's definitely a lot more clear. And one way is you can actually tell by how old Odysseus is. So I think he did a good job of clarifying that part. But let me just say, this movie is meant to be seen in IMAX. And what I mean by that is it's loud and the scenes are really intense and big and they use amazing practical effects. And I don't think that this movie would be quite as good on a phone or on an airplane. Even on at your own home theater, it may, not hit as hard as a theater. So I think you need to see this movie in IMAX. Um, this movie is kind of a cultural revolution as well, because this may be the last of its kind in the sense that Christopher Nolan uses mostly practical effects. He doesn't use a lot of CGI, doesn't for sure doesn't use a lot of AI, and movies from now on will probably be mostly AI. So in a way, this is kind of a celebration of doing things in real life, and the scale is just epic. I have to say, this might have some of the most loud, intense scenes of any movie that I've ever seen. So when you see it in IMAX, just know that it's going to be crazy, but it's good. And a big test of kind of how good a movie is afterwards is how do you feel? And afterwards, I felt hyped. I felt like I wanted to watch this again. So overall, this is a really great movie. Let's talk a little bit more of kind of the in-depth details. So cinematography is stellar, 10 out of 10. I mean, the sets that they use, the visuals, some of the stunts that they pull are just amazing. So it's going to be a visual masterpiece, and IMAX, that larger screen, is really going to help complement that. Audio wise, Chris Nolan has come under kind of some critiques in the past for having scenes where you can't understand people or having the audio quiet during I should say, the talking to be rumbled and quiet during a large action scene because it's mixed in with other things. That happens a little bit in this movie, but it's not crazy. So for the most part, you should be able to understand. But that does bring me to kind of one of my first critiques. It's that the actual writing, the words that they say, they can't decide if they want to be modern English or if they want to use the old script like it was written in this book. So, for context, this is one of the oldest sci-fi books you could say ever written, and it was written in the form of a poem. It wasn't English. There's been many translations of this poem because if you translate it word for word, it's actually very hard to understand. So they've come out with, translations of this book or poem in more modern English. And there are times in the movie when they say modern things like "let's go," or but there's also times where it seems like they're reading a script from Hamilton or Shakespeare, where they say a word or say a phrase and it sounds very old fashioned. So I wish that they were more consistent in the language that they were using. Um, the casting and the acting is phenomenal. All the characters do a great job. Matt Damon, you know, he's kind of the same in all of his roles, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But once you've seen Matt Damon, you kind of know the way he acts. In this case, he has a larger beard and he's pretty shredded. But for the most part, you're going to get that same Matt Damon experience. Tom Holland is just wonderful. Uh, but obviously there's no gripes, and so I think the casting is very well done. So the music, this one is really interesting, and I can't quite tell how I feel about it. They use some older instruments that I think were supposed to be part of that period, and they have some, I don't know if you want to say beats or some background music that almost sound tribal by nature, like they're trying to show what music was like back then. And sometimes this music was playing during emotional dialogue scenes between two characters, and I thought it was a little bit distracting because usually in kind of like the pinnacle emotional part of the movie between two characters, you would want there to be silence or very quiet, probably strings type instruments. But in this case, it was happening in one of the scenes, and I just kind of found it a little bit distracting. But during the action scenes and the intense moments, it is just drums and loud stuff going crazy. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It hypes you up. I mentioned again, the theater is very, very loud. I mean, everything is shaking. I don't know if it was just my theater or if that's what the experience is supposed to be like in IMAX. Forgive me, I have a few notes. The faithfulness to the story. If you've ever read that book, and then you found out that they were going to make a movie, you know for a fact they're not going to be able to cover everything that happens in the book. Completely impossible. They do a good job of hitting on the most important scenes. I'll be honest, there's a few intense action parts of the book that showed up in the movie, but it was like 25 seconds and then they moved on. And I was looking forward to seeing it more play out. So they do hit on the key pieces for the most part. You know, there are parts that they omit for the sake of time, but I think if at the end of the day you have to make a movie, and it can only be 3 hours max. In this case, it is 3 hours, but they hit on the important parts. They're usually so. I think the biggest message of the story is just a father trying to get home to his wife and son. And that's pretty much the moral of the story in the book in survival. They try to add a little bit of here's the takeaway from the story, here's what you should learn, and it's about, peace between mankind, honor in warfare, a little bit about redemption, but it didn't really fit into the story. They try to tie in some of his war, uh, some of the battles he's fought in and what are the lessons learned from those battles, but it just seems kind of like they're trying to force a moral of the story. I think the moral of the story is a man trying to get home and he'll do anything for his family, and that's good enough. But they try to wrap it up at the end with like, oh, here's his big learning and here how he's a changed man, and I felt like that didn't go. Thought it was. So overall, this movie is very good. There are parts that are very slow. In fact, it starts off pretty slow and it gets more and more intense as time goes on. So, there's going to be some deserts at the start, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, and not everything has to be action. Once again, this movie is meant to be seen in the theater in IMAX. It truly is. This isn't a Marvel movie where it's, just eye candy and quick, punches and quips being said everywhere. You have to understand the context of the whole storyline, what he's trying to do. You have to appreciate the practical effects that he did. They built a city for this movie. Everything in this movie, almost everything was built, a physical product. And I think Christopher Nolan is trying to send a message that people still want to see real life filmmaking and not just AI slop. And so this has to be appreciated in the right context. That's not to say that it won't be good if you watch it in the other context, but I think if you have a chance to get out to the theater and see it, it's definitely going to be worth it. Kind of like an Avatar type thing, but obviously not that type of CGI. So, wonderful. Once again, Christopher Nolan knocked it out of the park. I totally expect this to have a huge box office. Um, so I guess a couple of things. Travis Scott, he is in the movie. You know, he's a modern day rapper, and to me, that just seemed like a celebrity cameo. He's really not in the movie very much, or nor does he add to the movie. Um, you know, they would never admit this. I think they just put him in there so he can be in the trailer, and people can be like, "Oh, I want to go see what he's up to in this movie." Um, so wonderful movie. Go out and see it, and thanks for listening to my thoughts.